and welcome to Wellness Warrior. This is a podcast series by the Mindful Village, a community by Emerge Performance, where we interview professionals from various walks of life and industries, and really understanding about mental wellness and its relationship with resilience. And of course, we also hear from the Wellness Warriors their personal stories on how they strive and continue to be wellness warriors as we speak today. So I'm your host, Han Yi, a sports and performance psychologist, a human capital consultant, and a fellow wellness warrior here at Emerge Performance. And together with me is my co-host, KK. KK?
Thank you, Han Yi. Hi, I'm your co-host, KK. I am Emerge Performance's lead strategist and coach. So today we're really happy that we have invited Johnny Ong, a psychotherapist in private practice, to be here with us to talk about mental health and well-being. Let us welcome Johnny to give us a brief introduction of himself.
All right. Hi, everyone. And thank you, Hani and KK, for this opportunity to share my thoughts and insights. Basically, I'm a psychotherapist, been in private practice. This is really my second incarnation, so to speak. So more than 15 years ago, I was a corporate warrior, if you have to add that. So I was a corporate warrior chasing after KPIs and numbers. I was in several companies, and my last company was actually very different from what I'm doing now. I was in this company called EMI Music, a record label. So I was living the glamorous life of rock and roll, no sex, no drugs, just rock and roll. And it was a great time for me. Unfortunately, all good things come to an end. So, the music business reached a sort of, I think, sunset status towards 2007. So EMI was acquired by private equity, and they basically tore up EMI to shreds, which resulted in me getting a golden handshake, fairly good. But at the same time, I was at the crossroads of my life because a word got round in the industry that I was, retrenched, and I was sort of available. So the biggest music company then was Universal Music, and still is the biggest company, I would add, sort of reached out to me, offering me a similar position. It wasn't formal, so I thought about it, spoke to my soulmate, my wife, who is a banker, which can be very convenient in such times because then you can are given the latitude to dabble a bit. And so my wife says that, no, come on, the business is going down. If there's anything you want to do, now is the time. So again, I have to qualify here that I had the privilege of having a wife as a banker and a banker as a wife. So she's a banker both at home as well as outside. So all good then. So I was in a good place. So I said, why not? Right. So at that time I was, just nice. So I said, why not go into something that I've always wanted to, which is speaking, training, and some form of writing. And that subsequently evolved into me going into psychotherapy. And it has been rewarding ever since. Of course, the initial times were tough. I had to go back to school to study, to relearn, and the common phrase now, upskill, is it? Upskill, retool, or whatever you want to call it. And so I had to do all that again, which was good because really you have to go through that whole process to really know what it's like. And it was a good learning curve for me. Tough learning curve, but good learning curve. And that really is how I started my sort of foray into mental health. And I think in particular with the pandemic in the last 2 years, I have been kept busy in a good way. So that's really my sort of intro into mental health. So
Thank you for the overview of how your journey started into this particular area of psychotherapy. And so we are particularly keen around this thing about mental wellness and resilience, right? So I'm also curious actually, as you review back your career, right? I mean, having gone through different transitions and change, how has that mental wellness and resilience played out as part of your journey over the last few years?
Right, very much because firstly, when you navigate or you embark on a new career, it's a new mountain to climb. There are a lot of challenges there, and yes, you mentioned the word resilience. Well, it requires a lot of that because as a starting point, when you start off doing these things, well, nobody knows about you. You have to start, bearing. So going through quiet times, going through times where self-doubt creeps in, going through times where you think, was this the right path? Maybe I should have taken on the universal job. Then I wouldn't have to go through such trauma and distress, But then perseverance, I guess you apply the medication to yourself first in mental health. So you start, telling yourself, start building coping resources. And one of the landmark learning, so to speak, is this thought of mortality. Now I'm going to go a bit morbid here, but it's this thought of mortality that struck me a lot, and I'm constantly reminded about it. That at the end of the day, we are all mortals, and we'll have an end point. And at that time I was already, if you were to look at the demographics, I probably have crossed more than the halfway mark already, which means I'm now looking at a shorter runway, and that has always reminded me that hey, we got to start looking for things that are much more meaningful. I mean, the first phase of my life was about material acquisitions, about all the extrinsic rewards, but then you start to say that after a while, I mean, I'm sure, Honey, about hedonic adaptation, right? After a while, things don't move. You buy something nice, after 3 months, you get tired of it, right? So it's sort of, you start to realize, hey, these things don't matter anymore, and then you start to look at the deeper, more profound sort of lessons, the more profound rewards. And one of the best rewards is really when you help someone heal. When people come back to you and say, hey, that helped me, turn my life around. My relationship is getting better. My relationship with my wife, my child, my daughters. In fact, because I used to do a lot of school workshops, and in one of the workshops, I had a father who used to abuse his daughter physically, I mean violence. So he used to, he believes in the rod. And so I was in that workshop, and that was my initial years. I was sharing that, then this came out of my book, that you should never use violence, as refrain from it, because the consequences are tremendous. And particularly with the father-daughter relationship, because the daughter is the protector. I mean, the father is the protector to the daughter. And when the father uses a cane or a hand or fist on the daughter, that destroys her world, And when I shared that sort of, really sharing my thoughts about it. After the workshop, he came to me trembling and in tears, telling me that, now he knows that how much damage he has done, because every time he approaches his daughter at that time, she trembles. So it's these sort of, encounters and experiences that add so much meaning to the work that I do now. And it sort of spurred me on. Wow, this is one great story that you can sort of just, whenever you are in doubt, think about it. Wow, this is worth so much more, money you can buy, and it becomes very profound. So that's really how I cope. And if I were to add, sorry, I hope I'm not going into a lecture. I believe in the 3 domains the biopsychosocial. And I think in terms of building our coping resources, and at that start when I was embarking on this journey, I of course biologically you have to take care of yourself, right? So I exercise, I eat properly. I used to hate vegetables, but then I read the literature about what vegetables can do for you. I went crazy, ballistic. I'm now an evangelist as far as vegetables are concerned, to the point that I bore people to tears. Sleep, of course. Then the psycho aspect would be, your thinking patterns. In fact, I did a test. I can't remember where the test, because it was done years ago. I was borderline judgmental. So I'm now a reformed, open-minded, less judgmental person. It helps, makes you much happier. Social interactions get better. And as far as the social dimension, I think it's so important to have that network of relationships, and it starts with my own family. So for me, family is a very powerful resource.
Great,
so
thank you. Thank you for sharing. So I'm hearing a couple of very strong, very powerful ideas, right? This thing about building resilience is also in a way about being connected with something that gives purpose and meaning. And whether that's the work that we do, the relationships that we have, or just taking care of ourselves and enjoying that meaning. And if we have that, then that helps one get stronger, and it's a powerful, strong coping mechanism.
Sure.
Great.
So, Johnny, just now you said something that really caught me is about healing. So I believe in your field of work, you support a lot of people in their healing process.
Right.
I feel in our modern day, we don't really have the space and time to heal. What do you think of this?
Well, when you say that, what do you mean? You're talking on an individual basis that it is something we don't pay attention to, that we may have unfinished business that we have not resolved. Are you going along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, I feel people are very either in avoidance or rushing or running away from this process of healing.
Right. If again, I think a lot of people, many people are running on autopilot. And really a lot of their behaviors and actions on a daily basis are almost routine and automated, to the point that they become mindless, right? And one the other huge coping resource for me, and I'm also in danger of becoming an evangelist as well, although not a very credible one. I would like to, is this concept of mindfulness. And it's interesting that you mentioned that people have no time to heal because they are busy occupying themselves with all sorts of other things other than the things that matter. And as a therapist, I encounter people with a lot of unfinished business who have kept it repressed and suppressed, but it is impacting them without them even realizing that. And it's during therapy that these things surfaces. I mean, that's what we do, right? To spot all these things and so forth. And quite often when you ask them, how is it that you don't know that you have low self-esteem? And this is a guy who is a very senior in the corporate hierarchy. And he says, I don't know, every day I just find things to do. And it's really, they are being mindless. They're rushing through life. It's frenetic. They're rushing through life, occupying themselves so that they are distracted from the things that are still hurting them. And it's surprising that that people are going on autopilot. The majority are on autopilot. And if I were to use Pareto, right, I'm sure you're familiar with Pareto. Pareto says the 80-20 principle, right? 80% of what we do can be found in 20% of our activity. So we are probably running on autopilot, at least for most human beings, 80% of the time. And we're just trying to make things routine so that we don't pay attention to the things that really matter. And mindfulness, to me, is one of the ways of promoting healing. One of the ways, because all of us may have some form of unresolved issues that we have never tended to, we never catered to. And this is healing. This is mental wellness. I will talk about mental wellness shortly, but yeah, this really is what I feel it is. So people just push it under the rug. I think prior to the pandemic, corporations were pretending it wasn't there. In fact, it was taboo, it was stigma, it has no place in the organizations. Only after the pandemic started and lockdown came about, and employee problems started to surface. In fact, I had one case where this employee was so this company consulted me through Safe Space. This employee used to be very collaborative, very good natured, very basically happy person. In a few months, he transformed, started to become very aggressive, started to procrastinate, and in one of the meetings with HR and the leaders, this employee lashed out at both of them. But good thing it was done virtually, otherwise it would have probably been physical as well. And it was a shock to two of them, because it was, wow, this person suddenly transformed. But credit be given to them, in their wisdom, they felt this could be a mental health issue. And when they shared the symptoms with me, I said, there's high chance it's burnout, because of working in isolation and with projects and going on, probably contributes to burnout, because a very dedicated employee. The thing is that the more dedicated you are, the more susceptible you are to burnout, and if you're not going to take care of yourself, there's a high chance you will experience burnout. And that's, I guess, so I told them that it's high chance burnout, and they subsequently referred her for counseling, gave her, a long leave to recover and so forth. So that's one of the nice stories that to see companies react positively. Yeah. What are your thoughts? Yeah.
So on that line, right? So burnout is certainly something that is becoming more apparent and public, right? People working hard and not being able to do what they have to do as well. So actually for the audience, right? I mean, what are some of the clear signs or indicators that actually this could be burnout, but especially for those who are uninformed and need to know this? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. Number one would be apathy, where you start to become disengaged. So, you used to be very committed to your job, like people chase you for deadlines, you will respond with a lot of adrenaline. Now you totally, to use the lingo, bochap, don't care. You really couldn't be bothered anymore, right? People are there frantically chasing you, and you don't feel anything, right? So you're disengaged with the job. There's no more emotional connection to the job. That would be one. The second would be you doubt your efficacy. There's a doubt in your self-efficacy. You start to feel that you're no more competent for the job. You start to feel that, hey, I'm no more. In fact, to the point that you develop imposter syndrome. You say that I'm no more good at this. I don't think I can survive this. And the third, I think, would be the disengagement in terms of relationships. You're no more connected with people. You don't feel connected to people anymore, and you don't derive pleasure in connecting with people. I think that those are very significant signs that could possibly lead to burnout.
I see. Okay. So for example, we know what are the indicators and the signature of someone who has burnout, right? And sort of tying it, so what, right? And I wonder, is there anything from your book? So I know you've written a book about don't live your life in one day, right? So any ideas or tips that from that body of knowledge to help people work with some of these mental challenges?
Right. To use an acronym, I would use the 3
Singapore is
R's.
all about acronyms.
Yes. Yeah. So let's use this acronym of the 3 R's. So the first R is rest. You need to rest. A lot of people are pushing themselves. They are midnight warriors. To borrow your they sleep is inconsequential to them. It's like immaterial. Why sleep? You're missing out so much, right? So you don't have enough rest. You don't take leave. You it's a badge of honor. So that's the first R, right? The second R would be recreation. Apart from work, they have nothing else to indulge in. There's no fun. For me, the good thing is I enjoy music. I love music. I love my wine. And I love reading. So I'm just not bragging, but at least I have some form of recreation, right? Of course, which one I focus on is another question altogether, lah. Whether one reading or music. But you can do all three at one time also, huh?
Sure.
Yeah. So that's recreation. And the third is relationships. Who do we have a go-to person? Do we have somebody who we can just bare our soul, to that person, right? And I have like in the form of my wife, because we've been together for the longest time. As a couple, we are together for almost 40 years. Married, we will hit 31 this year. So it's a long time. We are so familiar. We basically can share anything and everything with so I think, and of course with family and good friends, I think that's important. So I'll use the 3 R's as a framework lah, to sort of hopefully prevent you from burnout. Yeah, and based on, and this is what research is telling us. So it's not my wonderful ideas. This came from research that these 3 R's are extremely important. So I'm wondering, what are your 3 R's? In particular, what are your recreations? It would be interesting to know. KK and Annie, what are your recreations?
Oh, I love coffee. I love
Oh, okay.
coffee.
Okay.
Yes,
Wow.
so I love coffee. I write as well. I enjoy
Oh,
writing,
wow.
journaling as well.
Wow.
And you might not see it because of the background, but I do have paintings
Oh, wow.
at the back.
Wow.
So these are my recreational, and the last one I really resonate, relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the healing process to support better mental health, the bonding and relationship, the energy that you get from healthy relationships
Of course.
are very supportive and powerful. It's the best medicine.
100%. And we all know, right, from a scientific basis, that when you connect with somebody else, your brain releases oxytocin, and oxytocin makes you feel good, right? We need more of it, if only they could sell it in a shelf, right? You'll be taking lots of it. But the thing is that the connection with the human element, because whenever we are in distress, the brain will send a signal to reach out, and we need that oxytocin. So yeah, well done, but very sophisticated recreational habits you have, huh? Mine is not so sophisticated. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah,
How about
I mean,
yours?
look, I just think, I mean, I completely agree. Whether it's rest, I sleep well. I have my
Oh, good.
ample rest. My recreation, I am into barbecuing. In fact,
Oh,
we're gonna get a new upgrade in our barbecue set. So I love to do that. I love cycling and I love doing sports. So that's my medicine now, or my escape.
right.
I'm also a mindfulness practitioner, so
Oh,
that's
great.
also in a form my way of resting and my own recreation. So being contemplative and finding that quiet time. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Various ways, right? And I do wonder. I mean, because of course, for people who struggle in those areas, right?
Mm.
I say, how can we help them or enable them to develop community, right? So for example, I work so hard, I have no time, I don't sleep, I don't talk to anyone. And of course, it's how do we break that cycle, right? And maybe it's about habits. So any thoughts on how we can, whether to cultivate some of this 3 R's into a person's routine, if you will?
Yeah, I think number one is really for them to, I think it has to start with themselves. And before, I know I talked about the 3 R's, but there's a slight diversion here. One of the common themes I see in the therapy room is the lack of self-acceptance. This lack of self-acceptance, a lot of the problems, the issues that surface, you can trace it back to the poor self-acceptance. So that is I think would be the starting point. Because if that is not addressed, then these 3 R's will be, it's a bit difficult for them to attain that, to practice that. So it has to start really with their self-acceptance. And you'll be so surprised that many of these adults, who are thriving as far as their careers are concerned, they are still anchored in the past, where a comment by a mother or father or relative or a reaction from somebody has still stayed with them, that they have never fully accepted themselves. And in fact, in one of my clients, his work is okay, but his relationship with his family is not good, in the fact that he doesn't really communicate. And I managed to trace it down to his lack of self-acceptance. And he feels that people are not going to, even his family members are not going to value his interactions and so forth. And that's causing problems, of course, within the family. And so I can say that it starts off with the need for self-acceptance. They have to understand that a lot of times they don't truly accept themselves. They don't truly respect themselves, right? And really, in terms of self-compassion, that's something they got to start to nurture. So I know all of these new terms, right? Mindfulness, self-compassion. Now, in the past, I myself was a cynic. I used to think, well, this is some new age, fad that will probably go away. But after reading and trying it out myself, my God, I was saying, oh, why didn't I do this earlier? Right? So I've overcome cynicism in vegetables, in mindfulness, right? I think these are good starting points. So I think mindfulness helps in also self-acceptance, in self-compassion. I think it's very, very good. So in terms of how do you get these guys motivated, I think the starting point is they must first deal with their internal voice. They need to do that internal voice, before they then can look at these other three. And I think once they resolve that, once their relationship with themselves is built upon, then only can they start creating that, the building the resource in the other three domains. Because once they build self-acceptance, they will be more open to building relationships. They'll be open to trying out new things in terms of, maybe new activities, and in terms of new recreations, and in how they take care of themselves. I guess that's how I see it.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I mean, so what I'm hearing is that the inner work first, right? And then once that is sort of worked out, and so it also comes with awareness of the inner work, the inner conversations.
Right.
And I know, for example, clearly a therapist can help, right? Psychologists and all that. But then, okay, like I don't have access to that, for example, right? How can one is there some DIY or some approach to address some of this inner stuff? Yeah.
Right. And I think, again, I'm in danger of evangelizing mindfulness. But mindfulness,
Oh, that's great.
mindfulness is so easily practiced. Don't you agree?
Yes.
Just you can start off with your breathing, right? And I've always told people, you mean to tell me you got no time to breathe? Right? You need to, right? Anytime you can breathe, but you need to breathe. Come on. So why don't put it to full use? You need to breathe. So put some method in the madness, so to speak. So try to incorporate that, and I think that's a great starting point. So I know so you're saying is mindfulness the panacea for everything? Well, I think it's a good starting point, because you start. In mindfulness, you have to be comfortable being alone with yourself. Emotions start to surface, right? You start to be comfortable with distressing thoughts and emotions. And in fact, and you start to build self-compassion. And I think this is so easy to adapt. And I think most people know that, but they are not convinced. So I guess all of us can play our part in spreading this, to use the word, gospel of mindfulness. And to tell them there's a lot of therapeutic benefit in it. And in all my training sessions, in all my practice, because I basically have three functions. I'm a therapist. I do a lot of mental health training sessions with my partners in corporations, and I lecture. So I'm an adjunct lecturer in counseling psychology. So in all these domains, I will always find a way to spread mindfulness. All right, I will always find it that, hey, there's something you can start off with. Mindfulness is so simple. Why do you think you even have, like now your smartphones and your smartwatches, they even have apps to remind you to breathe? to practice some form of mindfulness. And that's how pervasive it should be. In fact, mindfulness is the new exercise, if I were to say, right? In the 20s and 30s, when you ran, people say, who are you running away from, right? Now it's accepted as something that's very useful. So mindfulness, I think, is hopefully it will head in that direction. So if you ask me how they can do it, is you start off mindfulness, being comfortable with yourself. And I think it addresses at least the bio and psycho domains. Biologically, you are regulating your amygdala, right? Because your amygdala always gives us a lot of problems. It overreacts and we start getting frantic. And psychologically, it helps you to accept thoughts, distressing thoughts and emotions. So I think it does a biocycle. And as far as the social domain, if you find like-minded people in mindfulness, you build your social support as well. So it's a 3-in-1 solution, if I have to add.
And it starts with your breath, so that's a resource that everyone has access to.
Yeah, so and whenever they give me excuses, I say, "What, you got no time to breathe?" That sort of shuts them off, like, it's like, oh, true. Yeah. So
Right.
yeah, please
So
forgive my enthusiasm and zeal for mindfulness.
no, I think this is good. I mean, part of Wellness Warrior is also about promoting mindfulness. So if we are to invite you to share, I mean, I get where people come from when they're not convinced about what do you mean just breathing, right? If they're outside of this psychotherapist profession. So if we invite you to share with us for the wider group when we breathe, okay, so now what do we do without breathing? What are some of the simple guideline you would share with us?
Well, first I'll talk about I think people need to be motivated to do something, correct? What is the reward for me for doing this? And they want something that is substantial, significant. And one of the ways I motivate people in taking up mindfulness is to point to the literature, to the scientific, research on mindfulness. And it has been established in many reports that we know our brain we have the prefrontal cortex, which is basically the logical part of the brain, and then we have the amygdala, which is the emotional part of the brain, and on a daily basis you have a battle between the two. And mindfulness has been found through neuroscans to reduce activity in the amygdala and increase activity in the prefrontal cortex, which means you are taming your amygdala, which means you are managing emotions much better. So that will be a good starting point in terms of motivating people. And of course, the techniques, there are many techniques. There are many ways of practicing mindfulness. So for me, right? I forgot to mention that I run. I used to run marathons, but I now realize that was a terrible idea because my legs are all now damaged by all that running. I don't know why I did so many marathons. I did 5 and I should have stopped at 1, but I guess you try to better your time and then realize that it doesn't improve, then you just give up, right? Age catches up. No, that's a poor excuse. I just wasn't training properly for it. But anyway, so there are many ways to practice mindfulness. Mindful eating. A lot of times we eat and then we rush off and then we say, what did I eat just now? What did I really eat? Right? So mindfulness, mindful eating. When I run, I put on my earphones, my AirPods, and I focus on the music, catching the scenery. That's mindfulness. So a good 30 to 40 minutes, your concentration span is there, just listening and taking everything. So that's another form of mindfulness, and just simple times between breathing, just finding time to breathe. That's mindfulness. So mindfulness is not as esoteric as it is. It's not so profound. It's actually very simple to practice. I mean, Honey, you are a mindfulness advocate as well, right? I'm sure you'll find ways to practice mindfulness on a very daily basis, right? So it's not difficult actually to incorporate it into our lives. So there are many forms of it. Of course, the breathing is a good starting point, right? Because what happens is then you learn to pay attention to the present. The problem with people who are experiencing distress, who are not experiencing mental wellness, is they do time traveling. right? They either go back to the past and think of those wonderful, glorious days, which are all actually very colored, right? You always like to think that the past is so wonderful, but we know our brain plays tricks on us. Actually, we forgot all the terrible times we went through as well, right? So when I first left the music business, of course, I thought, like, oh, I miss all those wonderful concerts, all those wonderful, interactions, all those glamour. But I forgot about the times where I was chasing after numbers and the stress it was causing me and the eczema that I was getting, before conveniently forget all those. So you either travel into the past, you get depressed, or you travel into the future and you get anxious. So mindfulness teaches you to start paying attention to the present, because we know that the more your mind wanders, your mental health suffers. Don't you think? The more and that's why you find people doom scrolling, they're going through their phone every day. Mindless, it's doom scrolling. And then they start looking at certain news and then their mind wanders even more and they feel so unhappy.
Yeah. I mean, I get it. So I'm a practitioner and an instructor around mindfulness as well. So I definitely see the value in it, right? And I'm also curious, sort of shifting gears, but in a related way, right? Which is really about the stigma around
Mm,
whether it's mental wellness or even mindfulness, right? Or contemplation, because sometimes it's like, oh, what is this? Like as you say, new
mm,
age science at the workplace, or just a
mm,
passing fad.
mm,
And we don't have time to talk about this, right? Who has time to be alone? Who has the time to take breaths, right? So
mm.
any observations around maybe like the social stigma of all these subjects, yeah, especially in the workplace.
I think the definition of mental wellness has to be very clear. Um, in the past, people tend to have the medical model, right? You are either mentally healthy or mentally unhealthy. So there were two dichotomous extremes in viewing mental health. And we know now the trend is towards a more balanced view of mental health, that we are on a continuum. So there are no extreme categorizations. There are days we feel good and there are days we are not good. And we know there are people who experience anxiety, depression, panic attacks, even schizophrenia for that matter, who can function and be termed as mentally healthy because they have coping resources. So the medical model has dominated the narrative for the longest time. And now when we talk about mental wellness, we must see it as a continuum. That even if you have a mental disorder, you still can function and you are deemed as mentally healthy. And I think that definition has to be clearly I mean, this trend, this narrative, this understanding of mental wellness should be sort of propagated. It should be disseminated, because I think many are still stuck in the medical model. Oh, this person has panic attacks, something wrong with this person. Even the language we use, come on, right? Sometimes we make fun. Oh, that person is so psychotic. I mean, we are already disparaging, and people with real mental issues will be discouraged from talking about this. So I think firstly, we want to define what is mental wellness, and the current model, and even the psychiatrists and psychologists are adopting this new definition of mental wellness, which is on a continuum. And there is no extreme categorization. And once we avoid that extreme dichotomous categorization, I think it's very helpful in facilitating this conversation, particularly at the workplace. So in many of my sessions, for them, it's something new to them, because they tend to see in extremes. They will say, they ask questions like, what, you mean someone with depression can be deemed as mentally healthy? Yes, provided they have coping resources, correct? If they are taking care of themselves in the biopsychosocial domains, they can function on a daily basis. We should not tar them as being dysfunctional. They are functional because they have coping resources, and that's what we want to sort of spread, that mental illness is not a two endpoints. It's on a
So
continuum. Yeah.
So that addresses the stigma immediately, right? So it's not
Right.
like, oh, you are, so there's actually a lot more room to explore further and welcome people and to have conversations and to understand what does it mean to be well, what the mental aspect of performance, etc. I hear
Right.
you.
Right. And sometimes also, you can also share our own experiences, right? All of us may have gone through some degree of anxiety and depression. And if we share this, then it normalizes it. Then people start to say, "Oh, I'm not, I'm not weird." And a lot of my clients who come into the therapy room think that they are the only abnormal people with such afflictions, and once you normalize it for them, they start to feel much better already, because it's not something that is so unnatural and so forth. So, like, I think what KK says, we can talk about physical health like nothing, right? So I think people must start to accept that, well, when it comes to mental health, it's the same thing. Yeah, you can have afflictions, but it doesn't mean that person is totally dysfunctional. Coping resources, lifestyle changes, support mechanisms are always there to help people cope.
So just now we also mentioned that the result of COVID, this concept of mental health and well-being has fortunately become more widely discussed. So with people adapting to post-COVID and adapting to the changes, what's your observations over, will this trend of acceptance of mental health and well-being, will it stay on?
To be brutally candid with you, people accept it, employees accept it, but do the leaders accept it? I think that's more important, because the leaders may suddenly, and we know right now with the current climate, a lot of tech companies are cutting jobs and so forth. So it's causing a lot of, pressure. People are starting to worry. So the companies now become very goal focused. So to the point that they may then start to relegate this, right? And in doing so, they're going to make it worse. So I find that, wow, this is dangerous. It could be a slippery slope, where, you start off and then slowly you start to, then the lessons learned from the pandemic will be forgotten as time evolves. So that's my concern. And I noticed that pattern now. Even from the webinar topics, from the training session topics, from, coping with anxiety, coping with stress management, now it's goal setting, team performance. You know what I mean? That sort of like gives you an indication, I think I think their focus is changing. So sometimes I get these requests, I'm like, oh my gosh, financial management, achieving your goals, working as a team, peak performance for team, and I say, okay, I can see the shift now. And but still you have those many other companies who will still look at mental health issues. So I notice a bit of a change now, that people are starting to get complacent, particularly the leaders. All right, I'm not sure if I'm putting myself in a precarious position like that.
But you're triggering a very important question that I continue to grapple with personally and professionally, which is really the the thought behind wellness warrior. Can we have performance and wellness at the same time, right? And is it a zero sum, right? Because the idea is that, wellness, we retreat, we don't engage in anything, we rest, yes, but there's also a time to deliver and work hard, for example, right? And can we also continue to do both and find that balance? And I don't think it's a simple constant, and you're always constantly adapting and trying to tweak that balance. Because yes, I mean, we do need performance to do well, for example, but can we do it in a sustainable? I mean, that's also another buzzword, right? About the needs of the human being, right? And I think if we can find that balance, actually, performance actually increases, right? And it's in a more holistic way, and actually everybody wins. And any thoughts around that? And I know you have some materials about peak performance as well. So, yeah.
Just before I go there, because I happened to read something in, I think, Time or Newsweek, and this is an interesting article. The article was, they noticed that quiet quitting is slowly being reduced. It's no more going to be a phenomenon, because people now are scared to lose their jobs. Okay, so they go, if they are being singled out for being identified as quiet quitters, or they are targets number one. So the good news is that, quiet quitting, which used to be sort of quite was a talking point, lah. I see that as, I think, no more an issue. Now, coming back to your statement on peak performance, I think it all starts with the individual taking care of themselves first. It's so important that they need to know that, and you mentioned the word sustainability. Yeah, we have standards, but if you keep pushing yourself, if you keep pushing yourself, well, when we talk about peak performance, there's the curve, right? Where you know, under stress up to a certain limit is very good for us because it will push us to our peak performance. That means we go into a red zone, we go into the optimum zone where stress and our performance are at its optimum. That's called peak performance. But prolonged exposure to stress, maximum stress, will ultimately result in diminishing performance. And that's where burnout comes in. So it is extremely important. Yeah, I'm not saying, you know, relax all the time, but yes, push yourself to peak performance, push yourself in terms of the standards, but you still need to go back. You still need to go back into the green zone and say, hey, time to take a break, and then you push again. So that has to happen. So yes, peak performance for sure. I mean, everyone wants to survive in this world. They need to earn their keeps. But we must also understand that this okay, it's the Yerkes-Dodson model, yeah, YERKESDOD as well. The Yerkes-Dodson, if you go and see that model, that is a perfect diagram or representation of how you achieve peak performance and what can happen if you keep striving for peak performance without taking few steps back every now and then. Then you will have diminished performance and ultimately burnout. And that's what a lot of people push themselves, particularly the type A personalities. They keep pushing and pushing, and you know, I have no time for rest. I cannot rest. I cannot take a break. I must keep being at this level, and that's how they ultimately just wear out.
So thanks for sharing that, right? So I'm taking a couple of ideas again. So the idea that peak performance is not a permanent state, right? So it's a temporal state. So you can only go up the mountain for a while, after that got to come down. And this idea about being able to regulate, right? So you need to have the habit of pushing, but also the habit of being able to scale back and rest, as you say, and focus on the 3 R's. Because I think the problem is, I think a lot of us fall into that habit. We just want to push. And when it's time to slow down, we don't even know how to slow down, right? And I think that's where the problem arises.
Right.
Yeah.
And for me, because I work from home, I work from my home office most of the time, there's a danger where I don't draw the boundaries. There are times where, you know, I'm so involved in something, right? It's so easy for me to just come back and do work. But after a point, sometimes you get, hey, how come I'm feeling so tired now? And then you realize, hey, time to stop. You know, much excited as you can be, it's like, because you thought of idea and you want to incorporate it into your, you know, your training or your what do you call lesson plans or even therapy for that matter. After that, you pull it, then you realize, oh gosh, I'm actually feeling tired now. And that's because you've been pushing yourself, not realizing that, hey, your resources are diminishing. And so let's not forget the physiological aspects of it. So I guess the Yerkes-Dodson is a perfect sort of answer and antidote to preventing burnout.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for all your insights, Johnny. It's been great chatting with you, and not just from the professional body of knowledge, the practicalities, the suggestions, and your own story on how you use that and pertaining to mental wellness and resilience. So I'm sure the audience, as much as the both of us, got so much out of it. So thank you once again. So our podcast will be streaming live to you every other Mondays of the month on LinkedIn. So make sure you give us a follow to keep up to date with the latest updates. You can catch also all the episodes on the major streaming platforms like Spotify and Google Podcasts. So give us a follow there as well. And so that's it from all the wellness warriors this week. It's time to catch the 3 R's: rest, recreation, and relationships.
Oh, well said. Thank you very much. Yes. And thanks for having me on board. Thank you.
And see you at the next episode. Bye for now from Wellness Warriors.
Thank you.